Hello, my friends, and we are back. Welcome to the RobCast. This is episode 204, and I've been wandering around this summer, and now we'll start making some RobCasts again. How about that? This one is called Menuha, and or you could say Menuha. And I want to teach you this word. I want to show you this word. And it feels like the right thing to do on this, did I mention, screaming hot mid-August day? I was in the UK, so shout out and much love to all of you in the UK that I got to see. Then went off the grid for quite a while with my family. And that was just glorious, as you can imagine. Then I went to Brazil. I just got back from Brazil, and I just want to send some love to all of my new Brazilian friends, Tiago, Natalia, Luciana, Carol, Claudia, Rodrigo, Anderson, MC, Smiles in the house, Deborah. I went down for a Holy Shift tour. It's my first ever time in Brazil, first ever tour stop in Brazil, and it was just amazing. And I ate feijoada for the first time, which was as glorious as they said it would be. We went surfing in Guarahaja, is that right? And I got to see so much amazing street art. I got to meet some friends of Banksy, but aren't we all really friends of Banksy? And then there was this moment at the end after I did the Holy Shift show. I met these two guys, and they said, at the beginning of the show, you said this was your first time ever in Brazil, first time ever doing a tour stop in Brazil. And then these two Brazilian dudes, they put their hands over their chests, and they each say, "But you've been in our hearts for a long time." Oh, come on. If that doesn't melt you, you have a heart of stone. So sending love to all of my new Brazilian friends. I will return at some point. But speaking of tour, this afternoon, my family and I are going to the airport, and then we're going to go off the grid again. Actually, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go to Oregon, and we're going to drive around Oregon. We're going to go to a Shakespeare festival. And we're going to go to a lake, and we're going to go to the ocean, and we're just going to drive around Oregon. That's the plan. And then at some point, we'll be done driving around Oregon, and then the Holy Shift tour continues. So Grand Rapids, I'm coming your way. The first show in Grand Rapids sold out. Second show has a couple tickets left. Then Detroit. This is all, what would that be? August 23rd, 24th, 25th, 26th. 2 Grand Rapids shows, Detroit. And then Toronto, I See You. That will be the 26th. So, and Pete Rollins will be opening on all those dates. And so a number of you, I'm coming your way. And then I have all this new content, all this new teaching about the mind. I've been so fascinated with how we have these assumptions, we have these expectations, we have our furniture arranged in particular ways in our minds that work against all the things we want to do and become. And so I have a couple days worth of new content about this. Can your mind be transformed? Can you actually take thoughts captive? What does it mean to change your thinking, which always ends to your life changing? So I'm doing this event called A New Mind. I'm doing it here in LA in November. It's a 2-day event, and of course there'll be some surprise guests. But I got all this new content I got to share with somebody. So all that info is at robbell.com. Oh, and one more thing. Before we get into Menuha, I am like bursting because we're about a month away from doing the workshop reads of my new play. I wrote a play called What's a Nucka? And we did table read, and now we're doing like the next development step, which is called a workshop read. So we're taking over the Greenway Theater here in Los Angeles. Kristen Hange is directing, and what we're going to do is essentially a workshop read is the actors stand behind music stands and read the sort of read/perform the play. But then Kristen, the director, and I, we're going to show you drawings of what the stage will look like. We're going to show you drawings of what the wardrobe will look like. Then we'll come out, they'll do the reading, and then afterwards Kristen and I will come up and we'll talk some more about the play, perhaps do some Q&A. We'll see. So there's still some tickets left for the workshop reads of my play, What's a Naka? And, that's like, can you believe that we get to do all this? But now, my friends, I thought we should begin this week, and I think, and then the next episode as well, maybe the following one as well. I want to begin by exploring, I want to pursue a theme here, and I want to connect these all, but I want to begin with this word, Menuha. I stumbled across this a number of years ago. It's a Hebrew word, which probably doesn't surprise you. Menuha, or a version of the word Menuha, Nuha, appears, it actually appears in the Ten Commandments in the Hebrew, where it talks about the command, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you'll labor and do your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath. On it, I'm reading from the book of Exodus, chapter 20, you don't do any work. And then the explanation for why on a seventh day you don't do any work is because in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that's in them, but then God rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Now, why is this interesting? Because this idea of God resting on the Sabbath day, the word rest there is the word nuah. That's where you get this word Menuha. And the word rested, it's also the story about Noah and the ark. When the ark finally comes to Nuah, it comes to rest. And by the way, Nuah, Menuha is where you get the word Noah. So Noah, and there's a play there, there's a connection between the name Noah and then the ark resting, which is interesting in the context of the story, because the story is about a move from a violent God who wants to destroy people to a God who says, I'm never going to do that again. So by the way, any story in which God changes God's mind is a story about human beings changing their minds about God. So when people are like, what kind of God changes God's mind? A better question would be, what kind of people tell stories to explain the deepest nature of reality in which the divine changes? So the story is about people waking up. They're waking up to a less violent, more loving, to a less destructive, more peaceful understanding of the source from which all comes. You see how this is all much, much more sophisticated than people generally read these stories. But the story in Exodus is about the divine resting. And somehow the command for people to rest, to spend a day doing no work, is to flow out of a larger, deeper understanding of the depths of reality, the divine, or whatever language you want to use for this, source, spirit, rests. And so God resting is about the nature of reality. There's something central to creation itself about rest, or as we're now saying, Menuha. Now, let's go back to Genesis chapter 1, because the Bible opens with a poem, because some things are so beautiful and profound and mysterious, they don't fit in literal categories of language. You got to move to poetry. So the Bible actually opens with a giant poem. Genesis 1:1 through roughly Genesis 2:3 is a poem that just builds and builds and builds, and then it crescendos. It reaches its creation culmination in this seventh day, which is different than all these other days in the poem, because in this day the divine doesn't do any creating, the divine rests. So it all builds up to this, and the word there for rest is the word where we get the word Sabbath, which means cease or desist. Now, here's the insight. Creation isn't complete without rest. There is no fullness of life without celebration. There is the work, there is the making, there is the creating, there is the organizing, there is designing. But without the enjoyment, the celebration, the rest, without the party, the joy in response to everything that was done, you don't have the fullness of creation. So thousands of years ago, these Hebrew poets were insisting that there's something about the nature of the universe itself that it flows from, it's driven by, its engine, its culmination, its climax, its crescendo is rest, is a ceasing from striving and effort and sweat. It's celebration. Oh, by the way, we should talk about the numbers here because this will all relate back to Menuha. Hang with Menuha. I can barely say it. Here's what I mean. In Genesis 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That verse has 7 words in it. Those 7 words have 28 letters, which is 7 times 4. Chapter 1, verse 2 has 14 words in it. That's 7 times 2. The first 3 Hebrew words there, in the beginning, God created, those 3 Hebrew words have 14 letters between them. That's 7 times 2. Chapter 2, 1 through 3, the whole section on Sabbath is made up of 35 words, which is 7 times 5. The word earth in the poem is mentioned 21 times. That's 7 times 3. The word God is mentioned 35 times, 7 times 5. The terms, the heaven, also called the firmament, that term occurs 21 times, which is 7 times 3. The phrase God made and it was so, the phrase it was so occurs 7 times, and the phrase it was good occurs 7 times. So these patterns of 7, the poem is intricately arranged in patterns of 7 and repeating patterns of 7. Oh, by the way, in the entire Hebrew Scriptures, Old Testament, the number 7 occurs 287 times, which is 7 times 41. The word seventh occurs 98 times, which is 7 times 14. The phrase sevenfold occurs 7 times, and the number 70 occurs 56 times, which is 7 times 8. I think it's safe to say the number 7 is fairly significant. So the whole poem and the whole structure of the poem and the number patterns to the original people, readers and hearers would have been incredible. They would have picked up on this. They would have understand that the poem is, in the beginning God created. The poem is, the earth was darkness and void. Spirit entered into the water. They would have heard 7, 7, 7, 7, 7. And the 7 refers to fullness of the vitality of creation. And 7 is the number which essentially brings us to the rest and completion, to Menuha. So there's something about the way these people understood the nature of reality that had them seeing Menuha, 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 rest, celebration, rejuvenation, renewal. Now, why is this interesting? Hang with me here. First off, this story here, or the 10 Commandments in Exodus, is being spoken to people who have just been rescued from slavery. And these slaves had been in Egypt where they were owned by the Pharaoh and they had to work all the time, 7 days a week. So you're essentially, when you work all day long, your value and your worth comes from how many bricks you make in their slavery in Egypt. Your identity comes from how productive and efficient you are. And so these people have been rescued from that life. And in this new life, essentially they have to find out what it means to be human all over again. And so the 10 Commandment phrase about now you're going to observe a Sabbath. You can work for 6 days, but on 7th, do no work. is a new understanding of the deepest depths of reality. It's a new rooting in the God who rests. Because honestly, the idea of like a God who makes the world and then rests, it's an absurd idea, correct? A God who rests. And obviously the writer is fully aware of how this is slightly absurd, an infinite divine source of all things who's tired. But what's interesting, it never talks about the divine being tired. It talks about rest. That's different. A ceasing from creating. That there's something about what it means to be human being. That you're not experiencing the fullness of your humanity until you're living in this rhythm of doing and not doing, of working, creating, building, arranging, organizing, and celebrating, resting, ceasing from your efforts. Now, another question, and this gets fascinatingly political, is the Hebrew scriptures, and we can start with Genesis 1 and work all the way through, were edited together in exile. So later on down the road, these people find themselves in this new land. They don't observe this 6-in-1 rhythm to their lives. They don't let the land lie fallow. They don't give the land a year off. They don't practice a Sabbath. They do not embrace the Menuha, the resting of life. And the Babylonians come and just conquer them and haul them away into exile. And so their culture is destroyed. They are yanked away miles and miles and miles from home in a foreign culture with foreign people, foreign language, foreign stories, food, dress, all of it. They're in this foreign land, and it's their prophets who say, you know why you were conquered and hauled away miles from home? Because you didn't practice Sabbath, or you might say, you had no Menuha. So for the prophets, if you don't have this rhythm of life, this 6-in-1, if you lose the Menuha of life, those moments when you're unplugged, those moments when the computer is turned off, those moments when you're free from the buzz and the adrenaline hit. Essentially, the prophets are saying, you had no Menuha, and so because you had no Menuha, your entire culture, politically, socially, economically, was destroyed, conquered, vanquished, and you were hauled away. So literally thousands of years ago, people were exploring, acutely aware of how without Menuha, without rest, without those periods when you aren't doing much of anything, you're just celebrating, you're just being. You don't have this built into the structure and rhythm of your life. Everything can unravel very, very quickly. Menuha is an actual thing. So in the creation poem, it's as if the poet is saying, making sun, moon, and stars, it's poetry once again. The creation of quarks, animals and species, and the ongoing evolution of the whole thing, that's a thing, but so is not making a world. That's a thing. Not doing it is just as much a thing as doing it. You think about music, like a chart of music. There are the notes, and then there's the rest, and the rest is noted as well. And without the rest, it's just solid noise. You don't have a song. So the rest, the notation may be a space in between notes, but the space is just as real as the notes on either side of it. Now let's move from music to architecture. Think about negative space in architecture. Let's say you have two columns, and those two columns, marble, brick, stone, paper mache, whatever it is. You have these two columns. But when you place two columns near each other, let's say 11 feet apart, you now have a space between those columns. The placing of the columns creates a space between the columns, which is called a negative space. The space isn't anything because the columns are actual things you can move around. They have a particular, obvious, apparent materiality to them. Stone, rock, etc. And yet, the space that is created between those columns isn't anything you can put your hands on. You can't move that around, and yet that negative space is just as real as the physical objects that created that negative space. Now, why do I talk about all this? Because it often appears in Western culture like you go, 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 then we collapse and sort of catch our breath, all so that we can do what? Keep going. Oftentimes, the pace of life, the addiction to movement, to achieving, to being productive, to returning all those emails, to driving the kids around, becomes such a thing that we only know Menuha. We only know rest. We only know the quiet breath of the relaxing celebration as something we're doing so that we can go back to the real thing, which is the buzz and the push and the pull and the grind of how we've come to understand everyday life. But in creation, in the creation poem in Genesis 1, the not doing all of that, the resting, the Menuha, the silence, the space, is just as real and just as vital to creation. Without it, you do not have the fullness of creation. Now, for many people in our culture, the enslavement to production and efficiency and the latest numbers it's such a driving force. It's such an addiction. How many times have you heard somebody who says something like, "Oh my, we just sat in on Sunday or Saturday. We just stayed in. We just made pancakes and we sat around. And I mean, we were just so lazy." What's that saying? When we say, "Oh, that was just so lazy," we're essentially saying everything is about the work, and there's either work or there's lazy, which is not work, as opposed to Menuha. We were doing the really important thing, which is nothing. Now, the reason why I say that is 7, 7, 7, 7 is the repeating pattern. That this idea of Menuha comes out of the story of creation, and in creation, the rest is the culmination. It's almost like the celebration of what exists and what's been done is actually the high point. It doesn't begin with, and day one God rested, so that God would have enough energy to actually get something done and earn her keep. Right? It's not, you rested so that you can get more done. It's all this was done. But then the real crescendo, the real climax of it all was the ceasing, was the desisting from labor, was the Shabbat, was the Sabbath, was the Menuha, was the rest. That's actually the mojo. So in one way, you could see Menuha as simply a mantra. Menuha is the mantra that you speak to yourself when you're having a hard time turning the engine off, when you're hooked into that buzz, that adrenaline hit. Because think about your texts. You know that feeling when you look down at your phone and you got a couple blue circles with new texts? It's like a little hit. It's like a little drug hit. The brain loves that. Ooh, somebody texted me. And the reason why you know this is if you look down at your phone at the end of the day and no one has texted you, how many of you have like this existential, it's like an echo chamber in the soul, right? Like if you got no emails and no texts and no phone calls and no direct messages for the next 3 days, how many of us would be like, "Oh, Did everybody forget me? Does everybody know that I'm around? So we resent this barrage that comes our way, but take it away, and we instantly have a low-grade terror. There's a panic. Do they still know that I'm in the game? Do they still know I got it? Do I still matter? Is anybody thinking about me? Menuha is like that mantra. It's that reminder. Yeah, sometimes we're not going. Sometimes we're not creating the next thing. Sometimes we're just driving around. Sometimes we're just staring out the window. Sometimes we're simply celebrating what's been done. And there's nothing on the agenda. There's nothing on the to-do list. Yeah, Sabbath is a day when your work is done, even if it isn't. By the way, if you want to get more done, Menuha is the way. And actually, you know what? We should do a whole episode on this. If you really want to be productive, then set it down and walk away from it. If you really want to channel your creativity, don't create. Go do something else and stop thinking about it. So we should talk about that. That's the upside-down truth about Menuha in the creative life. But we'll talk about that later. Now, let's talk about starting points. Think about a kid growing up in a home with no Menuha. It's an energetic field when there's no Menuha that simply says, what have you done? Keep going. Push, push, push. What are your grades? How much work have you done? How have you achieved? Menuha is both an ending point and a starting point, and that's, we're good. We're good. Kids can feel this energetically, whether or not they are unconditionally embraced exactly as they are. Because, and you can feel this in a relationship. You can feel this from a partner, from a lover. Are you 100% unconditionally loved exactly as you are? Is there Menuha, rest, and celebration in the space between you? Or does this person have a list, maybe a subtle, unwritten list of ways they wish you would change, and then they would not withhold love, but then you would receive all sorts of new love and rewards if you would just. Because think about it. How do you grow? How do you mature? What inspires you? What moves us is when somebody embraces us exactly as we are. There's no striving. There's no lists. There's no conditions. They meet us exactly where they are, and they affirm us, irrespective of what we've done, achieved, accomplished, how effective or productive we are. They meet us in this place of Menuha, of rest, of ceasing. And when people do this, when they love you like this, it's unbelievably motivating. This is actually what happened the first time Kristen and I got together. We've been friends forever, like 4 years. But the first time we ever hung out outside of this larger group of friends, etc., I was overwhelmed with this sense that she loved me exactly as I am, with all these quirks and faults and strangeness that comes with my Rob Bellness. And what's interesting is it's almost, in some ways, for the first time ever, I had this overwhelming sense that it was okay to be me exactly as I am. But what that did in the same breath, counterintuitively, is it made me want to be a better person. Without her ever saying, if you would just do this and this, I just have a short list of things. If you just clean these up, then you and me, we could have something between us. It was absolute unconditional embrace of me exactly as I was. And at the same time, it produced in me this volcanic desire, this massive urge to be a better person. That is the great counterintuitive twist on the divine resting. As you start in this place, you end in this place. Menuha, everything is fine. All the work is done. Menuha, you are a human being, not a human doing. Menuha, there is nothing to prove. Man, a kid picks that up in this home. Because being a parent is like architecture. Running a business is like architecture. You're like a column. And when you stand there as a column, you're creating negative space. You're creating the space around you, and the people around you are inhabiting that space. And when you are deeply in touch with the Menuha of everything, do you see why the Genesis poem, it's not just God rested, and if the religious language gets in the way for you, then just the nature of reality is a stillness, a peace, a shalom, a grace, a resting deep in the spiritual bones of the body of the universe. And you experience this. So think about a kid who grows up in a home where the first place and the starting place and the ending place is always Menuha. Yeah, you're a beautiful human being. You're supposed to be here. We value you and love you exactly as you are. Now, in light of that, let's go do some stuff. You start there. The energy, the vitality, the vision often will come. But how many kids live with this? It's 6 days of striving. Man, I got to prove, I got to earn, I got to show, instead of there's a stillness, there's a rest that I'm coming from. It's like a place that you're coming from. It's like Menuha is a thing, but it's like a realm that you're in. And then you move from that into your work, into your giving, serving, organizing, designing, mothering, fathering, all healing, all that. You move into that space knowing that you're going to come back to Menuha. It's the starting and the ending point. And thousands of years ago, former slaves wandering in the wilderness who end up later, their ancestors, in exile miles from home. Isn't it interesting, all the suffering and enslavement and exile that leads to people going, hey, hold on. We missed it. We lost the rest, and everything fell apart. Menuha. There's your new word. There is your new word. Write that in Sharpie on your arm. Menuha. That's at least my spelling of it. Menuha. Put an exclamation point on it. Even though it's a rest and a stillness, you probably should put an exclamation point on it. Yeah, Menuha. All the work is done. There's a mantra for you. Try that one out. All the work is done. And then maybe in parentheses you write, even if it isn't. Yeah, you need those days. You need those hours. You need those weeks. You need those evenings when you're reminded that efficiency and production are not the divine's highest goal for your life. That creation does not climax with does not crescendo with another bit of work. It reaches its fullness, it reaches its height and its zenith and then on the seventh day, God rested. If you do not have the celebration, if you do not have the ceasing from labor, then you do not have the fullness of life. Yeah, but if you have that, now you got something. So there, my friends, did I mention that it's a screaming hot day in Los Angeles in August? There's the word of the day, Menuha. And my hope and prayer is that it speaks to you something about the nature of the world we live in, that you move from that discontent, always plugged in, nervous buzz, to the calmness, to the peace, to the serene stillness of Menuha. And may grace and peace be with you every step of the way.